Oh, it's still going. It's still live. You must have hit that. Sorry.
We'll keep going. Her story is really dedicated to telling the stories of those in our community that really need to be heard most. And so vulnerable populations are the population that we feel have the answers to our community concerns and our issues. And we hold writing workshops across Long Island, in Nassau and Suffolk, in the jails, in regular community workshops with men and women. Even though we're Her Story and founded as a women's organization, we work with men too. And we offer writing workshops on college campuses across Long Island, 5 of them, and bringing students onto college campuses to experience what it is to hear your own voice and understand your own reality and share and feel a safe space in order to understand your issues.
And you want to introduce the 2 ladies that you've brought with you today?
Yes, absolutely. So I have Deborah Pure, a dear friend and also a writer with Her Story, also a member of New Hour for Women and Children, and Elsa Sanchez, who's a fabulous facilitator with Her Story Writers Workshop. She facilitates our workshops in Spanish and in English, our bilingual workshops, our workshops with our women, our mothers in the jail, and also our men and women in the community. And both of them write with us and have brought excerpts of their writing to read here today.
Great. And we also have Candy and a Throne. I'm going to normally allow you to do your 5-minute platform about yourself first, but just for time constraints, I'm going to just let her start reading.
Do it for me.
I'm going to let Elsa start reading first, and then we'll throw it back to you for that, and then we'll have the questions from Elsa's story.
Right.
All right, thank you. So we have the pleasure to hear Elsa's story.
Thank you. Seated on a wicker chair beside the swimming pool, I'm enjoying watching my daughters and their cousins splashing around in the water. How nice this racket is, I think. To me, this noise is the happiness of my 3 beautiful daughters who fill my life with light. Seeing them happy is what motivates me to keep struggling in this country that isn't my native country. I arrived in this country 17 years ago, speaking no English, with no advantages, with next to nothing, and like many people in my situation, I had no choice but to work hard. Like many immigrant women, I clean houses. Summers are hard since the work piles up and you end up aching all over from exhaustion. Winters are also hard because work is scarce but the bills aren't. But I always had my 3 daughters in mind, and I thank God for letting us come to this country and allowing my daughters to be born here. And now, sitting here, watching my daughter's glee, I close my eyes, and my mind slowly drifts towards the past. I begin to see faces, places, and colors, and smells start to come back to me. My mind travels to my childhood in Mexico at age 10, where I dreamed of studying to be a successful lawyer, where so many times I pretended in front of the only full-length mirror in our house to be a lawyer in front of an important judge, arguing with all my heart the most important case of my career. I also see myself at age of 12, dreaming like always, wrapped up in blankets to ward off the unending nighttime cold. My dreams were put on pause, however, upon hearing my father wake us up so early in the morning saying, "It's Saturday, we have to work. Hurry up because we have to get going." My shoulders dropped at the same time as my hopes, and I felt the urge to scream, cry, run out of the house. Another day of grueling work awaited me. Crestfallen, I got out of my bed and put on an old, worn-out pair of pants and a long-sleeved shirt, and went outside with my 3 older sisters and my younger brother. We arrived at the huge field. Today we had to pick tomatoes. The plants were still covered with morning dew. The sun had barely risen, and I walked onto the raised row of tomato plants and, bent over most of the time, with my feet in the furrows, began to pick tomatoes. Up and down the rows I went, cutting off the fruit and dropping it into a bucket with almost mechanical movements. I was thankful when it was time for lunch. My back was hurting and I was very hungry. After eating a plate of refried beans and corn tortillas, I had a few swallows of water, rested a few minutes, and went back to work. As the hours passed, the work felt harder and harder. The ground was very dry, the heat merciless. The sun's rays burned like a live ember on my skin, but I had to put up with it. My father said that I had to contribute to the work of the family, just like my brother and sisters. After working all day, I arrived home, completely exhausted, and the first thing I wanted to do was take a bath. I went inside to my room, got clean clothes, and then headed toward the area behind the house where I would take my bath. I took off my pants and shirt, leaving my underwear on, and lowered myself into a metal tub full of water, made warm by the sun. I began to pour water on myself with a bowl while I asked myself why, at age 12, I had to work like an adult. Why couldn't I devote my time to what I like, which was studying? It didn't seem fair to me. My thoughts were interrupted by the soap and water, making my hands burn, since the dryness of the soil had made my fingers bleed. I began scrubbing my arms with soap and water slowly, trying to get rid of the smell of tomatoes that was in my clothes, my hair, my stained and bloody hands. Why? I asked myself while I scrubbed my hands, trying to get the greenish color from the tomato plants out of them. Why? Unable to find an answer, my tears began flowing, but I hid them with the water I was pouring over my head. I could understand that maybe my father couldn't pay farm workers and that's why he used us, his children, as his workers. But what I couldn't understand was why he wouldn't allow us to break the cycle of poverty. Why couldn't he see that we could have a better life if we, his children, went to school? I look at my daughters, enjoying the day at the pool, and I feel happy knowing that they haven't lived the life that I lived, that they can go to school without worrying about having to work. They always have warm food when they come home from school, clean clothes, and above all, they have my kisses and my love to welcome them every time they walk into the house. And seeing them so happy, I wonder, what would have become of my girls if we were poor and living in Mexico? Would we, like my parents, have forced them at age 9 to do work that should be done by someone much older? Would we have frustrated their dreams of making something of themselves and rising up out of poverty? It's hard to say, since they were born in this country, and my husband and I have always known that we would do our best to raise them well. I might not be the lawyer that I once pretended to be in front of that old mirror, but I am a mother who wants a better future than the one she had. For my daughters, who have no luxuries, who do not own an iPhone, who don't wear expensive brand name clothes, who don't go on vacation to Disney World, and who don't have a swimming pool. No, they don't have any of this, but they do have something very valuable. They have their parents' heart in their hands, and our desire to let them fly in search of their dreams.
Wow. That was so moving, so moving. I'm speechless. I will turn it to Serena to share your thoughts and some questions you may have.
Yeah.
Well, not the questions yet, because I want to give her a second to introduce herself,
Okay.
but just
We'll hold the question.
we'll hold the questions for a second, but just your thoughts about her piece you may want to share.
Yeah, and thank you so much,
Yes.
Elsa, for
Thank
sharing.
you for being here. I really appreciate
Yeah,
it. Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
I think maybe I'll just hold off until we
Okay,
talk about
okay.
the question, because it raises the issue of what our young people on Long Island are facing, while her children have a different future. Many of the kids who come through our high school program, they are working after school. They may go to school and work all night and take care of a child, a sibling, until 11 o'clock at night and do homework then, and they've written about that. So the the dialogue for our young people on Long Island here is, it hits home with a lot of our young Long Islanders, and on a national level, certainly we'd love to hear what else we can do.
All right, and again, we have candidate Anna Throne-Holst, who is here to hear all of these stories and to talk to us about children's issues. So if you want to just let our viewers know a little bit about yourself and your platform.
Thank you, and thank you for all coming together here. It's great to have everyone here, and this is an issue that is front and center to me and has been for my entire working life. I have the very good fortune of being the mother of 4 children. I have 3 sons and a foster child, and they are now in their 20s and on their way, so to speak. But when they were little kids and we first moved to the area, so we're talking almost 30 years ago now, it was so obvious to me that we lived in a community of haves and have-nots, and where segregation, frankly, is a big, big part of the tapestry here. And depending on the circumstances in which you were born and what your background is, from a socioeconomic, from a cultural, from a racial, from a religious, whatever standpoint it might be, you will have a very different experience growing up on Long Island. And I didn't want, first of all, my children to grow up thinking that this is what the world should look like, and to take this as on face value, if you will. I wanted my kids to grow up with a sense of community coming together. And was frustrated too to find that there was no pre-K, there was no early childhood education, unless you had the means to pay for it and put your kids in a private schooling situation. And so I got very involved in a small alternative school that offered early childhood education, but where it became immediately clear that it was not a school that was interested in diversifying. It was not a school that was interested in reaching out into the various parts of our community and building diversity at the school. And so we were a small group of people. Some of you know some of my colleagues, and that separated from there and started a school with a mission entirely to bring in kids from all walks of life in the community as a whole. So we went actively out into parts of the community, African American, Latino. We went to the Shinnecock Reservation. And talked about the idea of starting a school that was particularly geared towards early childhood education, accessible to all, affordable to all, and where we would, first of all, not take any public funds, but also make it our mission to raise the funds we needed so that every kid who wanted part of that opportunity would have it. So we founded something called a Hayground School. We named it Hayground because it was the native place name for the spot where the school is now built. And it is going strong even today. And we brought together teachers and learners and families and kids and talked about how do we allow teachers to teach to their passion, to teach to the stories that had formed their lives, and that we would bring forward a generation of kids who, reading, writing, and arithmetic was all based on the idea of developing passion, and a passion for community and community building and social justice. And that was our goal. And then I went on from there to run something called the Bridgehampton Child Care and Recreational Center, which is one of the oldest not-for-profits in this country. And it was started several decades ago when a group of children who were the children of migrant farm workers that did not have access to early childhood education or affordable child care. And the parents locked these kids in a shed on a daily basis as they went to work, which was the only way to feed their kids and make a livelihood. And one day that shed caught fire, and those kids perished in that fire. And it is an absolute tragic story. But the good part of that was that it brought attention to what I call the underbelly of the economy, which today still exists in this area, and where the families and adults who were keeping our agricultural community working hasn't changed today. Same thing, and face the plight of childhood education, affordable child care, an ability to do the job, but knowing that your kids are safe, and also that your kids have equal access to early childhood education, because after all, what is at the foundation of equal opportunity? It is access
and quality.
to early childhood education on a level playing field. And also where kids are brought together from all walks of life at an early stage of life, and understand that that is something to celebrate, and that is the tapestry of our history in this country, both the good, bad, and the ugly of that, but it is the foundation of our United States of America. And so I was asked to run the Child Care Center. It had fallen on some very hard times, both legally and financially. And we set about making sure that every kid that was dependent on the services there had access to early childhood education. So we got Head Start program going there. It was the only Head Start program east of the canal, out on the East End. And pregnancy prevention, drug prevention, path to college, SAT tutoring, after-school tutoring, ESL for kids of newly immigrated families. And then we started an adult literacy program too, computer literacy program too. And I think her story did some workshops there. So we have some history with your organization as well. And out of that came a generation of young people who actually went to college, who got away from the sort of path to incarceration that we know is so unfortunately rampant in community where these opportunities are not there, and preventive programs are not there, and access to early childhood education. And then long story, but I ran for the town board in Southampton, and I ran really because I wanted what had been an old boys network to at least have a debate on these issues. Never thought I'd win, because everyone told me I had a snowball's chance of doing that, and I, wasn't born in a local hospital. I didn't graduate from a local high school, and I was running on the Democratic line. But lo and behold, I ran on people, not politics, and wanting to bring the conversation in the debate on these issues and make sure that they were at least talked about. And I won, and then I went on to run for town supervisor, and served a total of 8 years, and made sure that we got people to work together and that these issues were front and center. And now I'm running for Congress. Why? Because these are issues that we should be talking about on a national level, and we should be taking action on these issues on a national level. We talk about income inequality. We talk about lack of opportunity. We talk about a middle class that's eroding today. And we talk about issues around diversity, and we need to have access to early childhood education across the board, level that playing field, access to affordable child care. We need to raise the minimum wage like we have in New York State. We need to have paid family leave. We need to make sure that families that are struggling with 2, 3, or more jobs to make ends meet on Long Island have a path out of that cycle of poverty and struggle. And there is so much we can and should be doing, and I feel very fortunate to be running for this and to be fighting this fight as I fought the fight on a local level. And I'm so glad we're having this conversation today, and hope that we will have this conversation, through the remainder of this campaign, because these are the issues that we need to be talking about.
Well, thank you for explaining a lot about us, and I hope you viewers learned a little bit about the candidate and where she stands and what she's done around issues. I'm going to toss it back over to Serena, which I'm sure you have some questions that you want to address in regards to Elsa's story and children's issues federally.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in a time where there are so many issues that around the dinner table we talk about, what is the experience of new immigrants on Long Island? What is the experience of undocumented students on Long Island? So many of our kids coming through our programming into the colleges, they come from the high schools, Patchogue, Medford, Mineola, Long Beach. I mean, they go on, and they're writing stories about a parent who's working 3 jobs, and they are taking care of their sibling, and they are working a job and going to school and struggling to still remain in school, and the cards are stacked against them. On a national level, I think that we would like to know, what can you do to propel this issue in locally here. People have made their decisions about immigration. They've decided who should and shouldn't, and certainly there are opponents out there who say there's nothing that we should do, and this is all Skittles. So unfortunately, that kind of rhetoric is the opposite of what Her Story's mission is, which is to help everybody's voice be heard and to give our young people a chance to have a future full of hope. And our young people that come into our programs often say, I'm scared to death that one day I won't be able to work the second job and contribute because my family, will be kicked out of their apartment if I don't work, or if I can't take this after school class or program because I have to go take care of a sibling until 11 o'clock at night, and then I'll do my homework. What can be done about this? Because it's hitting us locally, but it's a national issue.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, we need to fund early childhood education on a national level. And there is an economist worth his or her salt that doesn't talk about what a good investment that is. When we invest in kids at an early stage in life, the reduction in cost to society in terms of how that then creates opportunity, reduces the cost of having to deal with the social implications of not offering that, and the cost of incarceration, the cost of joblessness, the cost of social programs, etc. So we need to have a conversation and action around making sure that every child in the United States of America has access to quality early childhood education. And we need to know that we have a tax system that supports that as well. And I do think that when we're talking about credits that mean nothing in terms of $1,200 credits for someone who doesn't even have the ability to pay into taxes where they're being itemized, and it's just not enough. I think we have an interesting reality before us today. We talk about the sort of landmark decision that came down by the judge in Connecticut that ordered the state of Connecticut to look from A to Z on how public education needed to be revamped, both in terms of how it's funded, how it's structured, and to make sure that the discrepancies between one school district and another, which invariably is linked to income and property values, that be completely relooked at and revamped. That's a conversation that needs to happen on a national level, and it's certainly a conversation that needs to happen with the action items attached to it in District 1, New York, because it is the reality that we live in New York too. And we need to bring together legislators from the state level, from the county level, from the local municipalities, and on the federal level to have these conversations and make sure that, first of all, the funding is there to make sure that every kid has access to this opportunity, and also that families that are working 2, 3, 4 jobs to make ends meet have access to affordable childcare.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things I think we should be talking about in District 1, New York, where we have a pretty broad access to education and training here. We have our community colleges that are, that are there and strong. We have our state system. We have several educational outlets here. I would like to see a working group put together with the administration of these educational facilities, as well as the private sector that works on childhood education, child care, etc., United Way, that kind of thing, to come together and talk about how do we create programs within our educational institutions, and working with mass transportation too. Now imagine a young mother who's working a couple of jobs to make ends meet today, but has all of the ability to, if accessible, to take a handful of courses that she needs to then be able to qualify for the next level of job where she's working, or move into a different industry and access the kind of work that will bring up income and that will allow her to start working what we would call a 9-to-5 job, without having to add 2 or 3 9-to-5 jobs to that to make it ends meet. And at the same time, when we talk about, the access to childcare, tutoring where needed, a meal, so we don't talk about that, the importance of making sure that nutrition and access to, good, nutritious food at least once a day, but we know it should be more than that. And so I would like to work on putting together, and I've spoken to some of the administrators on this, and the business community, the industrial community and whatnot, the agricultural community here, and talk about how we make sure that our educational institutions are providing the training, the courses, and working with our private sector to bring in the childcare and tutoring component, not to mention the nutrition component to this. I want to talk about how we will lift incomes in District 1 New York, and how we will lift equal opportunity in District 1 New York. That's how we'll do that. And these are real doable solutions. The business community is hungry for this, because they need access to staff that has that level of training. And schools want to see kids better supported as they go into, and have available to their kids the kind of foundation that then helps them function better as teachers and classroom settings. So those are the kinds of things that we absolutely can and should be working on right here in District 1 New York. But I think we need a national conversation on it. But on day one, that's the kind of work I'd like to do, and certainly work with all of you on it.
Thank you.
Do you have another question about that?
Yeah, I thought maybe Deborah could read a little excerpt of her writing.
Sure, so we'll get to that. Please in a little bit. I just want to ask some other questions, and then we'll get to that. All right, thank you. So, let's see, let's start here. So, you've touched on a lot of my questions, so I know that some of your answers, will be redundant, but I want to give the opportunity just to ask them again.
Sure.
Let's start with, what does childcare mean to you?
Childcare means a safe access to caretakers who a mother and father know they can, hand their child to as they go to work. and caregivers that have the training, that have the experience, that parents can know that their children are both safe and nurtured. And so if that is in a daycare situation, if it is in an early childhood education situation, Head Start kind of setting, but I think that talking about good, well-structured daycare in the hands of professionals that have the proper training and the background to be doing that is the kind of child care that I'm talking about.
Okay. Too many children in our country who are suffering from child abuse and maltreatment. If elected, how will you address this issue?
Well, I think we have to make sure that our medical community, when kids are going for checkups and things of that sort, the training has to be there amongst our medical community, and you could probably speak to this, where the signs of any kind of abuse are detected, and our social service agencies are given all of the tools and the funding that they need to be able to identify it, and to be able to deal with it in a sensitive and proactive manner. And today that's not entirely what's going on.
We are also here with Dr. Tatiana Brinkenhoff. I don't want to jack it up. You just say it. Brinkenhoff. Okay. And I sat here pronouncing it and saying it like that, and when it came out, it didn't come out that way. She is a resident with Nassau County Medical Center and a part of the Docs for Tots program, where Dr. Dina Lisa is the director of. And I'm just going to have her share a little bit about that program, and then if you have a question that you'd like to ask, please go ahead.
So, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here and meeting you. So, as we're talking about childcare and school, in the first few years, we know that's the most important for them to develop and be able to carry on, right? How do you think that you can actually implement expansion of the schools to everyone? Because we know that we always say we need to provide school for every children, but some of the families are very lost, right? And they don't really know they have to pass through a long process of paperwork and documentation they need to get through. And even if you want to talk about the immigrants, some of them are even afraid of coming and bringing their children to school and being themselves in trouble. Is there any thoughts onto that, or how could you?
Well, I think it's working with the school system and working with government on all levels, because I think that's something that we have not done very well, is work across government levels. And I think when state and county and local government comes together with federal government and looks at what are the realities on the ground in an area. We're talking about District 1, New York at the moment, and how we make sure that our lawmakers are working with our educators and identifying ways in which we can improve on all of this, and putting together a real concerted effort for doing that. And there are a number of organizations, both private and public, that are grappling with these issues. I think funding is a big issue, but also the avenues for conversation amongst and finding ways for those efforts to be cross-pollinated too, and not working at cross purposes or not even knowing about each other. And that's something that I would like to see done, and something that I would look forward to providing leadership through the congressional offices, saying, okay, who are the actors out there? Who are the stakeholders in all of this? Be it through the medical community, be it through the social service community, be it through the educational community, and get people who are the stakeholders the boots on the ground, if you will, on these issues, to come together and understand what the region looks like. And very similar to, again, I go back to the judge who I think was so courageous in issuing the decision that he did in Connecticut, and creating a mandate for just what I'm talking about. And for those of us who have worked in this realm, this is not reinventing a wheel. This is something that we've all talked about that we need to do, but we have a lack of resources. We have a lack of a forum for coming together to do this. And I think that a congressional representative who has the background in this and a passion for it, and has worked in this realm to get people together and provide that leadership, and that's a role I'd like to play, and working together with stakeholders like yourself, and also talking about what are the funding mechanisms for this, how do we find them if they're not there. And again, I have a lot of thoughts on that, but also how do we make sure that everyone who needs a seat at that table and then puts out a strategic plan with some real timelines and some real goals on it, because I think that's one of the things that we've seen much too much of, is working groups that do a lot of good talk, but then they kind of fall down on the walking the walk. And that's something that's always been front and center to me, is I don't want to just talk the talk, we have to walk the walk too, and make sure that we have some real set goals, they're attainable, and what the timelines related to them are, what are the tasks, and who's responsible for those tasks, and then how is it getting funded.
Okay, thank you. And at this time, we will let Debbie read her piece. Remember, she's also a her story writer.
So my piece is a personal story about reentry after incarceration, which I was lucky enough to have my family take care of my daughter while I was incarcerated, but a lot of people don't have that, and it's just about what you face when you come home trying to get some. Looking around, feeling lost. Who are these people? Everyone has problems. We all have issues. This is a horrible place for my soul. Babies crying, mothers yelling, as we all wait for our number to be called. Will I be accepted or turned away? This, I am sure, is a common thought among us. Just the littlest detail will exclude you from the help you need. I wonder how and when the social service system was created. It doesn't work well at all. It's a modern form of slavery, keeping the undesirable people in the poor neighborhoods, in the ghetto. This was the first piece I wrote after being released from physical incarceration and mental torment. This was a lifestyle I could not seem to break free of. Was the universe working against me? Was I destined to a life filled with guilt, shame, and heartbreak for all those who loved me? For 25 years, I went in and out of the system. I would come home, manage to get back on my feet with the help from my family, and the shame and guilt would resurface. My inner secret thoughts telling me I was not good enough, and why was I even bothering to be an upstanding citizen? I was a convicted felon trying to fit into a society that judges. Inevitably, I would give up and start the cycle again. I went to jail for the first time in 1988, and my last arrest was November 20th, 2013. You can do the math. While incarcerated at the Suffolk County Correctional Facility in 2014, I utilized the programming they had for women, which included Her Story, the writing workshop, New Hour for Women and Children, and the reentry group that Brighter Tomorrow started. These organizations made all the difference for me. My life now is beyond my wildest dreams, and it is only because I had women in my corner that saw my potential. They didn't look at me and see a convicted drug addict felon that would be on the system for the rest of her life. With professional women guiding me and mentoring my every step of the way, I now continue at my job of 2 years. I left transitional housing within 8 months. I have a legal car that I use to continue my education at St. Joseph's College, and recently starting an internship for my CASAC at Seafield. If I were to have gotten out of jail and went to a sober house and tried to get off of the system on my own, I am doubtful I would have made it. As a matter of fact, I am positive I wouldn't have made it. Our criminal justice system is not in any way helpful in teaching life skills. You do not obtain the navigation tactics and the patience needed to reinvent yourself. And coming home to an ancient social service system is a recipe for disaster. The money allotted to the shelter for my room and board was astronomical, yet if I wanted to secure a place of my own, I would only be allotted $309 per month for rent. Of course, the government cannot take care of every person who is struggling. This is why it was so detrimental towards my success that I had these programs that provided wraparound services. Her story gave me a voice in the community and made me feel as though my story mattered. They once gave me $40 towards transportation money. Most people here today cannot relate to what really being broke is. When I came home from jail, I had nothing but some jail clothes, and I was determined to make it on my own. I was 50 years old and refused to ask my family for any more help. New Hour gave me emotional support in the community as well, and donated me this computer that I'm utilizing right now. They provide the necessities in coming home package that women need, along with bus passes and gift cards around the holidays. The director is a hands-on leader, using her own vehicle to transport members to and from court appointments or visitation with their children. If the director at Brighter Tomorrows didn't see a brighter tomorrow for me, I don't know where I would be. After being employed for 3 months, the Labor Department and Department of Social Service decided that they needed all but $184 of my money monthly. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out it would have been impossible for me to do anything other than eat with that $184. So how would I transition out of the transitional house? It wouldn't be possible, ever. This is when the director let me stay at the house for 3 months, rent-free. Sleep on. I don't know where my journey is taking me, but I do know that I was given a chance to succeed, and I hope to encourage others. Unfortunately, money is always an issue, or a lack of money, I should say. All the empathy in the world won't pay someone's rent. I keep my side of the street clean, and I do what I can to encourage others. I am in touch with all the women who I came in contact during my last incarceration, and without them, my life wouldn't be what it is today.
Wow, wow. Thank you so much, Debbie, for sharing. Thank you for taking the day off of work to come here and share your story. Stories like this need to be shared with community members, need to be shared with our elected officials and candidates running for office. So I really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for sharing. Your story gives me good, happy goosebumps. So I will allow you if you have anything else to say about that, your story. And then we'll turn it over to Anna for some reflections.
I was a little apprehensive about coming today, and you seem like a really genuine, down-to-earth person, you know, that would fight for, like, the causes, because when you get to Washington, people don't care about formerly incarcerated people. I reached out to, I can't remember who it was, Savage.
Well, we're going to not say
Okay.
any other names.
Okay,
Yeah.
but anyway, this was last year, but I
Okay.
reached out to say, you know, something maybe like, even if a 6-month net for someone who is working, that they can just save their money for 6 months, but nobody wanted to hear. And he actually said to me, nobody is going to care about the incarcerated people because
Who
you
was
just
that?
spent.
I changed my mind. What was
Somebody,
that?
he was, I don't know, I'll get it to you, I'll
Okay.
email it to you later. But honestly, the recidivism, you know, it costs more money in the end to just carry somebody for like 6 months until they can get on their feet. I don't know, it's hard.
We need very fundamental criminal justice reform. I'll throw out a statistic to you that I think is so illustrative of how we are working today. Our criminal justice system in the United States of America today is a $200 billion industry. Out of that, about 1% is spent on defense of the indigent, people who cannot afford their defense. And as a result of that, the increase in numbers of incarceration and incarceration at a level that is not commensurate with the crime has skyrocketed. The compensation for public defenders and legal aid representatives has steadily gone downwards, while the caseload has multiplied manyfold. And today, many states and public defender services are actually breaking the law in the number of cases that they're hearing, but if they don't, nobody will hear these cases. And so we are stuck in a rut right now of people being incarcerated, not being heard in a criminal justice system that is perpetuating poverty, that is perpetuating recidivism, that is perpetuating crime, and perpetuating a lack of opportunity. And it is hurting our youth on a relative basis far more than anyone else. Because be it adults or youth, when a criminal justice system is not working, inevitably the children of those who are affected by this are hurt. And the cost to society and the cost to taxpayers, the cost to the economy is invariably higher than addressing these issues at the very outset. This is a formula that has to change if we are going to start to build out of a poverty cycle that is only growing in this country. And there are programs for this that have shown themselves to work. We're talking about a couple of them right here that you have, thank goodness, had the opportunity to avail yourself of. And your reality of now being on your feet and knowing that you have a support system there just reinforces for me how important it is that we work on these issues and that we make sure that people understand that funding these programs is just a better way to fund what we inevitably fund through taxpayer dollars. And if we're not funding these sorts of programs, we will be funding a larger incarcerated population. We will be funding a criminal justice system that is only going to cost us more and more. And so I appreciate you coming here today, and I appreciate you sharing your story, because it's not an easy thing to do, and I know it. And but voices like yours are the kind of voices that people that are making decisions need to hear, and they need to put a face to the issue and a voice to the issue. And when courageous people like yourself have the courage to come out and talk about it and help people understand that these are real things. These are not just balance sheets. These are not just numbers on pieces of paper. These are human beings. And you look at other places that have, the ability to gain training and coursework and things like that while incarcerated, and allow them for opportunity once you come out, and how again the cost to society is so dramatically reduced as a result of that. And that is the kind of criminal justice reform that I have a real passion for. It's a little bit personal for me too, in that in running the child care center, and on a couple of occasions actually bailing some of the kids out at the county jail, and knowing that we were the only outlet for any kind of support and hope and sense of, if we didn't stick with the kids, that this was going to be a vicious cycle that was just going to repeat itself. I look at these numbers and how we fund and don't fund our criminal justice system, and know that those numbers are just so backwards, really. And let's keep working together on these issues, because we need to make that change. It's really important.
Is there Serena, did you have a question?
Just a sort of a comment to add to, we're so thankful and grateful that Debbie is with her story and working with us and giving back. You know, I think for most women who go through the criminal justice system, the pathway that leads women to prison is very different oftentimes than men. And we're lucky to have Sheriff DeMarco, the county executive, Balone, who have made a priority about thinking about resources, hard money that needs to go behind fueling how women and men are able to get back into the system and work in society and become productive, and all of the children that are affected, especially with the heroin epidemic that is rampant on Long Island. And I think for organizations like Her Story, where although we work with men and women, our jail workshops are primarily with women, our mothers say to us all the time, I don't know what I'm going to do when I get home. I have no place to go with my children. And the cycle continues to keep them in its clutches. And you know, for those of us who have children, I think about some of the children and what they have to go through when they have a mother who's incarcerated. And so I think on a national level, I'd love to hear what kind of resources can come back into Long Island in terms of funding resources for women, because there are three pieces, and you mentioned them, Debbie. One is self-image and the stigma of incarceration for young men and women and mothers. And the other two pieces, education and housing, are huge, and they're costly. And I think, you know, those of us who are certainly part of the problem can be part of the solution. We know the issues really, really well, having lived through them. But it does feel as though unless you leave Long Island, head out to the city, take that train, go into a program in the city, a rehab, a support system, there's very limited resources for our women coming home. And we struggle, even as a small nonprofit, to provide those resources. So I guess the question is, what can we do?
Well, I think that we need to make sure that a clear understanding for what the specifics are right here on Long Island, because they are a little bit different. They're also very much the same throughout the country, but they always are a little specific also in terms of what we can access in terms of state funding, what we can access in terms of, and you just identify we have a county executive for whom this is a very front and center issue, as well as our county sheriff. And understanding what those funding pools are. But I go back to where I think that working with the federal government, state government, and county government to make sure that we optimize those resources and bring them here. And I think working with the private sector too, because a lot of times the private sector wants to see a partnership, as does the public sector, a partnership between the two, and where you get more bang for your buck that way, first of all, which is always really important, but making sure that we have what I would call a comprehensive strategic plan to look at exactly what the issues are in this district on Long Island, and what has and what hasn't worked, and how we best put a plan together going into the future, and make sure that we have federal funding coming, because there are all sorts of sources for that, as well as state and county funding coming to these programs. There isn't enough of it. I mean, there is not enough of it, but it is again, I think with a real structured plan that has the stakeholders in place for it, we can access that funding and advocate for more of it. And when you start to show results too, one thing leads to another in terms of all levels of government, as well as the private sector, seeing that this is a good investment. And those are the things we need to work on.
I mean, I think for us, a lot of, it's been conversation for the last couple of years. Our 16 and 17-year-olds are still sentenced as adults for non-violent crimes in New York State. Taxpayers, my taxes are high. All Long Islanders are paying super high taxes if we own a home. Why is there a disconnect between how high our taxes are and how we need to decriminalize young people who deserve a second chance, deserve alternative programs where they're successfully able to move away from the criminal justice system, and instead they're being thrown into the very jail that Sheriff DeMarco says, this is not the place for them. I'm housing them here because I have to by law, but this is not the place for them. And our courts are saying, our domestic violence survivors don't deserve 25 years in prison for defending themselves against an abuser, and yet they are sentenced to very long sentences because of that defense. You know, this is the time where I think on Long Island there's a real disconnect between how much money goes into our criminal justice system from our taxes and how much our taxes could be reduced if these alternatives that were smart on crime happened.
Well, I go back to what I was talking about earlier, when on a national level, $200 billion is spent on our, on our criminal justice system, and obviously a portion of that is right here on Long Island and in District 1, New York. And I think looking at how those dollars are allocated to the sorts of programs, first of all, making sure that defense is there, and good defense. And I will say, my hero is my oldest son's girlfriend, Jan, who is a public defender in Louisiana, and deals on a day-to-day basis with these issues, and in a very, very difficult environment for it. And learning from that, and learning what the day-to-day looks like there, is I think informative on how we start looking at where funding goes. And there is no question that a proportionate amount of that funding has to go into defense, and has to go into the ability to cycle out of what is an unbreakable cycle in so many situations, and making sure that we partner with the private sector on this. Because a lot of times I think the private sector wants to be able to offer more, but needs to be able to access the public sector on this, and work hand in hand. And I think it's our job as providers, but also as legislators, to have that real working plan in place for how we do that. And there's a lot to do, but there also has to be the political will to do it. Frankly.
Well, thank you again for sharing your story and your questions and comments on that issue. Our next question is about quality out of school time programs. So regular participation in high quality after school programs is linked to significant gains in standardized test scores and work habits, improvements in school attendance, as well as reductions in behavior programs among disadvantaged students. These programs have a particularly strong impact on low-income and disconnected youth. Yet, New York State Advantage funding for after-school programs has decreased or remained level funded in recent state budgets. What specific actions will you do to address the need for high-quality after-school and summer learning programs across the country?
I think it's front and center to this conversation. And again, as we started the conversation, when I ran the child care center, that was our number one thing, was quality after-school care, early childhood, Head Start in the morning, but then being able to bring kids in the afternoon after school, make sure that they had homework support, make sure that they had access to any kind of special learning needs that they had, support on that. And then as they went into high school years, SAT tutoring, that kind of thing. And these are the kinds of programs that we should not be defunding. We should, in fact, be ramping up the funding for, because again, you can very easily make the nexus between the decrease in the cost to society by funding up front these things. And again, I think it's a question of bringing together federal, state, county, and local government to talk about the priorities in terms of funding there. And my job has been and would be on the now hopefully on the congressional level, is to be a real advocate for that and a real voice for how we change that funding formula and make sure that the resources that need to be allocated to that are put in place, and those budgets are looked at from a clear understanding of how important it is to allocate resources to that, rather than having to put increased resources to, you know, to issues around recidivism and incarceration and whatnot.
Okay.
Excuse me, Shaniqua.
Sure.
Our connection is in and out, so you might want to.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
weakening for some reason.
Okay. If the minimum wage is increased, how would you help or support privately owned or small child care centers meet the gap?
Well, I think that, first of all, the hope is that as minimum wage is increased, it will give people resources to actually be able to avail themselves of that kind of child care. And, you know, again, that's money that's going into the economy, and it is giving the resources to some of the privately funded child care providers to be able to offer that. Then again, we have to make sure that this is, you know, quality child care and that it meets the real needs. But I think that is, again, when you start talking about the cycle here, and when people are making a living wage, which is really what we're talking about here.
Right.
We're talking about a living wage, and are able then to put some of their income aside to put their kids in childcare, which means that they then can access jobs and job training, and help bring them up in the income ladder there. That is again, that's a positive cycle of funding going around, and but a lot of these child care providers are dependent not only on the fees that parents can pay, but also the assistance from the public sector.
Right.
And that's something that has to be done well and in a very well thought out and planned way.
Okay. Did you have another question that you'd like to share?
Yes.
Okay.
It's another issue talking about incarcerated mothers. Then on the other side, there are the children that end up being in foster care. And I'm sure you have had a lot of experience with that.
And
And
some personal experience.
exactly. So now when we see kids in a clinic, for example, when they are kept being transferred from one family to another, we know these kids, they tend to have several issues and post-traumatic stress disorders. They're difficult to deal with, right? And when they transfer care, they don't have a continuity of the clinic. They get to be seen by
Or
different
school
doctors
district.
all the time, different schools. Sometimes I have encountered patients where we would like to send an emergency basis prescription and they couldn't get the prescription because they do not have the Medicaid card, for example. So I was wondering if you have any ideas, or it would be an issue that you would be approaching, as of like how we could make changes to make sure we can give a continuity of care to these children. So because we know it's not realistic that they're going to be in one family for a long time. Sometimes it's hard to get an adjustment. Sometimes we understand they have to be transferred from one family to another. However, maybe there could be a way that we could have maybe a central point that would connect all these families that is related to this kid.
I think going to the bottom of what you were just talking about is the idea that the way the system is set up now, children sort of inevitably will go from a foster family to the next to the next. And that has a lot to do with the support and funding for foster families, and the ability for foster families to access the resources and the tools to help the kids that they're fostering with the kind of issues that you're talking about, be they mental health issues, be they emotional issues, be they adjustment issues, access to medication, and medical care. And making sure that we have a system through our Department of Social Services, et cetera, that has the resources to support that, so as to decrease the turnover that happens then, particularly with kids that are high-risk kids and perhaps more challenging. And so looking at the funding formula for that, and looking at how we are structured to best provide that support. And I want to say something too, because I think, you know, when we talk about these things and we come back to the inevitable conversation about the funding. And, then you talk about, well, what is all this going to cost, and what is this going to do to taxpayers? Understanding efficiencies in this and understanding how you best structure, is something that is often overlooked. If there's a funding gap in order to meet the needs, a lot of times there's a structural misfunction there too. And I think that's where we need to ramp up our efforts too, is to make sure that we have the tools in place to make sure that dollars are spent as effectively and proactively as possible. And I think we tend to cut corners on that, is making sure that we have, the conversation with the caregivers and the social service agencies that are in charge of these issues, to make sure that they have a real voice in, how can we structure it better? How can we make sure that the dollars are spent in the end in the most effective way? Not necessarily efficient, but the most effective way. And that is a conversation that I don't think is happening. And again, it is one where it's difficult. It's a time issue too, because caregivers and caseworkers are often, beyond what they can handle in a day job. And so again, we have to make sure that is supported as effectively as it can be. And I don't think that is being done to the full extent today. So I would like to see a real working group and task force that works with these agencies and brings the conversation to the table and makes sure that the stakeholders that need to be at that table are there and have a voice in this, and make sure that when we talk about how we're going to fund this, that everyone is clear on that this is the most effective and efficient and proactive way of doing it. So the reduction of cost to society is then you can really show it.
Okay. And for my final question is, what makes you the best candidate for kids?
Well, I'd like to say that I'm a proud mother of 4 kids. I have 3 sons and a foster child, and I have run a child care agency, and been on the ground with these issues, and been part of putting a school together to bring kids and community and deal with the challenges of early childhood education, learning differences, the need to meet the needs of kids in a 21st century world today. And I'm passionate about it. I've devoted most of my career to it, and it's the reason I'm running for office, is because I don't see a future for us. And when we're talking about access to equal opportunity, and when we're talking about making sure that we have a path forward for all of our kids and all of our young adults, and it's the reason I'm running for office. It's because these are the things that really matter to me.
Well, thank you. Are there any last comments that you would like to make about your platform?
I just want to thank all of you for coming in today, and I just want to say that I look forward to working together on these issues, because I think we can make a real difference. I think we're so ripe for it, and with bringing everyone together and their experiences and thoughts and real proactive work on this, I think we really can make a difference. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time with me, and I look forward to working together in the future.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us. We thank Her Story and Docs Tots for being part of the conversation today. Again, this is Shaniqua Levin, Campaign Director for Every Child Matters on Long Island, where we serve as a bridge between the advocacy community and advocacy actions for children. We will continue to see you on the